Right, guys, welcome to the fourth episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is Martyn Sadler, and we have a special guest today with us. Martyn, can you introduce our fellow special guest?
Yes, welcome Richard de la Riviere. Richard is a regular columnist, a weekly columnist, in fact, with League Express. Those people who know our newspaper will know that he writes the Rugby League Heroes series of interviews with very famous players who have got a great story to tell. And even more important, he's actually written a book which is based on some of those interviews and some that he's done elsewhere, called 50 Wigan Rugby League Legends in Their Own Words. Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's very exciting about the book, and I'm pleased to be here.
And I will just quickly mention we will be doing a separate segment on the book itself straight after the news here, and you can stream that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We'll also have the video going up on YouTube. You can find our channel on YouTube at Total RL. And, of course, if you type in the League Express podcast on Spotify and Apple, you can find it and listen to it there as well. I'll quickly touch on where you can get the book as well. So it's my understanding, Martyn, if you go into our Total RL website...
TotalRL.com website, yes, and go into the shop, and it's there. It's quite easy to find, I think.
Yeah,
I'll be at Wigan next Friday signing copies as well, so when they play Salford...
Yep.
I'll be there before the game, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So if you're a rugby league fan, especially if you're a Wigan fan, I guess that's a must-have for your bookshelf.
Must-have for Wigan fans, ought to have for everybody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's also a number I saw on the website as well. You can call and order a copy, I believe. 01484 401 That's 01484 401 to secure your copy. So
that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. But stay tuned for that chat. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I guess we'll touch on the games over the weekend, Martyn. What's stood out for you? We had the relegation battle, which had some ramifications. Obviously, there's still
the relegation battle
left.
Was the obvious game that took centre stage this week, and I thought Wakefield would probably win it after 4 successive wins at home, but they didn't. Castleford, with their new coach, Danny Ward, and the last match Danny Ward coached in Super League, coincidentally, was in 2019 when it was a relegation game between Wakefield and London Broncos, and Wakefield triumphed on that day, and London, despite a valiant season, Richard, I'm sure you'd agree, they had a great season that year, London, but just didn't manage to win that last game to stay up, and the history of Super League might have been quite different if they had.
I'm surprised it's taken Ward that long to get back into Super League. It's I thought he made a real name for himself because London came up and weren't expected really to win much at all. They'd unexpectedly beaten Toronto in that £1 million game. And they came up and they flew out the traps, didn't they, at first?
They did.
A lot of it seemed to be down to Danny Ward. But, I mean, obviously I can't prove this, but I figured that Cass actually might turn up on Thursday. I just wonder, I know this might sound daft, but with Wakefield drawing level with them and then becoming favourites to stay up, I figured that just changed the dynamics a bit. And then suddenly Castleford changed their coach, bringing Blake Austin, and it just... I felt that going into it, a lot had changed over the last couple of weeks.
Yes, and the thing is, of course, that back in 2006, when they played each other in the last game of the season, and Wakefield beat them and sent them down, Wakefield changed coaches with 6 games to go and brought John Keir in. So, in a strange sort of way, there's a serendipity there, isn't there? A word that Derek Beaumont likes, where Castleford have now done it, brought Danny Ward in for the last 6 games, and I don't think there was much doubt that there was a much livelier spirit among the Castleford players than there has been under Andy Last. I mean, I like Andy Last as a guy. A great guy, very, very knowledgeable about the game technically. But I don't think Andy... I mean, coaches to me fall into one of 2 categories. They're either great technically or great motivators, and sometimes you get a combination of both, but not always. And I think Andy was a technical guy. Danny follows... John Keir in being a good motivator, I think. And you could see that, just the way they came out onto the pitch, the way they played, the way they addressed the game. It was... they always looked as though they were going to win that game.
I wonder if being away from home might have just taken the pressure off as well.
Oh, might have done.
I mean, look, Wakefield had home advantage in that game in 2006, and so that's not an absolute pattern there, but nevertheless, with it being the first game and they hadn't won for so long, I just wondered if that might have helped, especially when they started so well, and then you get a bit of disquiet among the Wakefield
But it was also
fans.
great to see Greg Eden scoring 3 tries. You know, Greg is one of my favourite players because, I mean, he can do some daft things sometimes, but when he's on form, he's tremendous as a winger. He's got great speed. He knows how to finish tries, which you saw with at least one of those. He actually went through several defenders on his way to the line. So I think, you know, it's great to see him playing well again. And
I believe that was his 150th try as well.
150th try, yes. He needed 3 for it, and he got them, you know, which was quite a remarkable feat. So great for him. But of course, the difference between 2023 and 2006 is that was the last game of the season. This year, there are still 5 games to go. Now, Wakefield have got 3 home games and 2 away games. Castleford have got 2 home games and 3 away games. And their first home game is against St Helens.
I think Cassie's fixtures are slightly kinder, though. They've both got to play St Helens at home, haven't they?
Yeah.
They've each got a tough one. One's got Catalans, one's got Wigan. Cass have got Wigan away.
Yes.
But I just think Cass might look at those fixtures and just think there's more chance of...
Well, I'm sure they will.
But Wakefield will also...
They've certainly got the momentum now.
Wakefield will not just need one more win, they'll also need a points difference swing.
Yeah.
So they'll need to hope that Castleford get some thrashings and they maybe, when they lose, that it's a bit closer.
Which now looks unlikely, doesn't it? Let's face it.
Yeah, because otherwise they're going to need 4 more points than Castleford get from, 3, but it'll be likely before.
You could just see in the warm-up, I think, just the way Danny Ward was sort of walking around, it just felt different, you know, it just felt like there was a bit of confidence there in their body language, and I think, you know, that's where the game was almost
Isn't it
won.
amazing how just a change of coach can change so much? It's one thing that I don't think we can explain unless you've been in dressing rooms. You know, people have this suspicion that maybe they weren't trying for the previous coach. I don't buy that. I just think that everything can change. If you change a coach at the right time and bring the right guy in, it can just work miracles.
Well, the thing about Andy Last as well, when they had that series of defeats, Andy looked like a man who was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. And if that communicates to the players, I think that makes it very difficult for them.
Yeah, if players stop believing you. When people say lost the dressing room, that's another cliche that's really annoying. But I think when you maybe get to a stage where they don't quite believe in you as much, then a new guy comes in and for whatever reason, they all, you know... Yeah,
absolutely.
You can't explain it, but it's just something that's always been there. But clubs don't always get this right, though. They sometimes sack a coach at the wrong time or bring in the wrong guy.
Absolutely.
But Cass, in the same way that Wakefield did in 2006, just seemed to have made a good decision. And how lucky that someone of Danny's calibre was ready and waiting to come in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and with many games left in the season, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few more twists and turns
I think so.
ahead of the end of the season. So
but it will be tough to see Wakefield recovering from this, though. I mean, the twists and turns would imply that they'll get a win on the board quickly, but...
Yeah, with the performance on the weekend, who knows?
Well, they play Salford away this weekend, so you know that's a challenge for them.
Let's go to Salford. They bounced back with a 32-point to 8 defeat over Huddersfield. This is a good win for Salford, considering the form over the past few weeks. What did you make
and a bad result for Huddersfield as well. But the crucial thing for Salford was that if you looked at their team, they had their spine back in place. You know, it was the Brearley at full-back, Croft and Sneed, and then Andy Ackers at hooker, which they've not played with for most of this season, to be honest. And that was why they had such a good year last year, a consistent spine that only fell right at the very end of the season when Brodie Croft and Andy Ackers... Well, Brodie Croft was out of the last game, and Andy Ackers only lasted 2 minutes in it at St Helens, if you remember. But, you know, as long as they've got their top first choice spine, I think they're in with a great chance at Salford.
Huddersfield are in a strange position, aren't they? That a few weeks ago they would have been looking at the bottom of the table, panicking a bit, but they can also still make the playoffs.
They can, yeah.
They're probably running out of games, but are they just 4 points off?
They can still do it.
But 5 games left is probably not quite enough.
Probably not, but, you know, the way that, you know, there's Warrington and Hull KR stumbling a bit, both sides probably, so there could still be room for another side coming into the top 6 who are not there at the moment.
There's a big logjam there, isn't there?
There is, yeah. It's very exciting, actually.
Yeah.
And it just seems to be the theme this year with how tight the Super League has been.
Absolutely.
And again, wouldn't be surprised if we saw some more twists and turns heading towards playoffs. But Wigan 13 defeat Hull FC, 12 in extra time. What did you make of this
very,
performance?
very unlucky were Hull, in my view, and I mean, it got to about 75 minutes and their captain, Carlos Tumavavi, was yellow carded for a dangerous tackle that didn't look as dangerous as all that to me, although he's since been suspended for 2 matches. So obviously the match review panel thought it was dangerous. And after he was sent off, Wigan scored their third try to draw level. Harry Smith couldn't convert any of the 3 tries, so it went into golden point time. And after a couple of attempts, Smith did it and kicked a field goal from more than 40 metres out, which was a great achievement, I think, and would earn him 2 points in the NRL, of course, Jake, but only gets him 1 point here.
I'd love to know which team has won most games in golden point since we had it. I maybe should have turned up to this with the actual stat. Maybe that's what you'd expect, but I don't have it. But I'd put a couple of quid on Wigan.
We'll check that out. Richard. Yeah, because yes, it would be an interesting one.
But just on Hull, I mean, I think their fans will still be pleased because I think this is good signs for next season.
Oh yeah,
nothing really to play for this season. And Tony Smith does have a habit of turning clubs around, doesn't he?
The problem for Hull is though that they are losing 3 key players. Obviously, Adam Swift, who's I think going to Huddersfield, isn't he? Jake Clifford going back to the North Queensland Cowboys, and Chris Satai, who's going to the Catalans Dragons. Now, those 3 players have been really significant for them this year, and to lose one of them would have been disappointing, but to lose 3 of them is incredibly disappointing, really, I would have thought, because they're going to be 3 hard players to replace.
Yeah, exactly right. Moving on, we go St Helens 28 defeated Hull KR 6. Is this an example of a bit of a Challenge Cup hangover, or were Saints just too strong on the day?
I think it was a Challenge Cup hangover for Hull KR. I mean, it wasn't a great place to go the week after you'd lost the Challenge Cup final. You were always going to struggle against St Helens, but they did score a fantastic try. If you've seen the highlights of that game, Mikey Lewis's try was absolutely outstanding, and it came from a brilliant move downfield involving several players, and a brilliant final pass. And if they could have played like that the whole game, they'd have probably got a much better result, I would have thought.
I think the 4 men's teams who played at Wembley all lost, which does imply a hangover element.
It goes back to the point I've made before. I wish the Challenge Cup final was at the end of the season.
Yeah, I heard you say that last
final.
week. Yeah, that would be, especially if one team gets to both. And that's very exciting, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And moving on to the other side that took part in that Challenge Cup final, Lee Leopards went down 30 points to 14 against Catalans Dragons. Obviously a strong performance by the Dragons, but I think Adrian Lamb, he even commented that this is a bit of an example of a Challenge Cup final hangover. Oh,
I think so. I mean, they obviously. It's difficult, isn't it? Because I was talking to Adrian, last week prior to that game, and saying, unlike if you win the grand final, you've got months and months to celebrate it. When you win the Challenge Cup final now, you've only got a couple of days, it seems.
Yeah,
and
right.
it's very difficult. But
I can think of instances where a team would win the cup on the Saturday, then they'd have to play a Super League match on the Tuesday, and they'd get thrashed.
Yes, absolutely.
That happened to Leeds in '99, I remember. But what Lee have done this season will be remembered forever. But it'll take an incredible effort for them to assuming they go Catalans in the playoffs to go and win that. I think that this is their season. They've won the cup, and
again, it
was
was a tough ask for them, wasn't it, to play Catalans the week after the cup final.
Yeah,
but they were winning at half time, and then they just ran out of gas, it seems. And Catalans are a formidable side this year. They really are, and they look like strong favourites to get to the grand final, don't they? Which will be an interesting one because. It makes it a difficult sell for spectators, particularly when there's only a week between the semi-finals and the grand final.
And the thing for me with the Catalans is Sam Tompkins. He's only got a handful of games left now. Writing my Wigan book, one thing that all these guys are legends, and we sometimes don't appreciate it until they're finished or many years later. But Sam Tompkins, what a career he's had! What an absolutely great fella, amazing to interview, and he's probably only going to play a handful more games in this country. That's a real shame.
Certainly. And, these days, this end of the season, it's the business end, and I think there's a lot of players that are probably struggling to get by weekend to weekend with niggling injuries. You throw in some celebrations after a Challenge Cup final win. With that, it's going to be very hard to recover for the following weekend. So,
what are you suggesting? These guys are professionals.
Yeah, that's right. No, alcohol makes the body recover a lot longer, I guess. But yeah, moving on, we had the Leeds Rhinos 24 defeat the Warrington Wolves 22. This is a bit of a crushing defeat, I think, for the Wolves.
I think it's their 8th successive defeat, isn't it?
Yeah,
they were competitive at least. The result was in the balance, wasn't it?
Yeah, but there's an interesting symmetry, isn't there? They had 8 straight wins at the start of the season. Now they've had 8 straight defeats.
This is the problem with podcasts, because if you find a podcast from 2 months ago, you'll have people saying, "Oh, isn't Daryl Powell doing a great job? And isn't it going to be their year?"
Absolutely,
it's a mug's game, is predicting, isn't it? But
Absolutely,
what an incredible up and down year their supporters have had.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of my Broncos from last year. I think they were top 4 with about 6 or 7 rounds to go last year, and then lost every game consecutively into the finals and missed out. They were 9th spot. So
it's hard to imagine Warrington.
Well, somebody said to me yesterday, I think it was, that Warrington Wolves are the rugby league equivalent of a football club like Tottenham Hotspur. Who were always threatened to, should win loads of trophies, but never do. And we can all think of clubs from different sports.
I think Warrington and Hull are quite similar clubs, aren't they? They've had Challenge Cup successes, but they've got the stadiums, they've got the money, but for whatever reason, just whether the squad is balanced right, and there's coaching decisions as well. Just don't seem to be able to ever look like Super League winners.
But I would love to know why it didn't work out for Daryl Powell at Warrington, because I've got great respect for Daryl. He's a very smart guy, but it just didn't happen for him, did it? And the curious thing about that is that if you look at Lee's Challenge Cup winning side, of the 17 players who represented Lee at Wembley, 5 of them were ex-Warrington players, played for Warrington last season, and Warrington let them all go. And that does say something about somebody's judgment at Warrington, doesn't it, I think?
Well, again, people can just go from one club to another and just look totally revitalised.
Yes.
And other players can just fall off a cliff going from one club to another. It's strange dynamics that we don't quite understand. They're just there.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see if Sam Burgess can turn it all around next year and
I can't
see
wait
what
for
he
that.
can bring to the
Can't
club.
wait for that.
It's going to be fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, bloody oath.
I mean, it's interesting, just on Sam, it's interesting that, as the listeners may know, there's some dispute at South Sydney at the moment where he's an assistant coach, with Sam and John Morris, his fellow assistant coach, apparently feeling very unhappy at the kid glove treatment that Latrell Mitchell and Cody Walker are getting from the head coach Jason Demetriou, and the news seems to be that they've been suspended from their duties, either temporarily or permanently, for criticising Demetriou in public, it seems, and which sort of almost I just wonder whether that might mean that Burgess might come here before next season, might come for the last few games of the season, which would be really quite interesting, wouldn't it, if that happened?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Burgess is probably the nearest the modern game has got to Ellery Hanley, not just as great loose forwards, but also their personality and their ability, I assume, charisma, to just walk into a room and they will just be, everybody will just be like, well...
Everybody looks at them.
Matty John said that about Malcolm Reilly, and that's why he was the best coach he ever had.
Yeah.
But these appointments don't always work, though. The great players don't always turn into great coaches, do they? No idea. But it's very good for the competition that it's happening, I think.
It certainly is. Yeah.
It's really interesting what's going on at South at the moment too, because they have lost a few games in a row, and there has been evidence and replays shown of just little effort areas where Latrell Mitchell and Cody Walker have come up short. So I think it's worrying signs for the South, and no one's immune to accountability in a club environment. So if that's true, they've come forward and
there's a lot to run in that story, isn't there?
Yeah.
What you're saying, I think.
And the other thing too I find interesting will be what's going to happen, because obviously we know Russell Crowe has a very close relationship with Sam Burgess. I can't see Sam Burgess being shown the door without Russell Crowe's permission. So, and John Morris also, he's a promising up-and-coming future head coach. He's been... playing
He's linked with West Tigers, Benji Marshall, isn't he?
Yeah, which would be a great pickup for the West Tigers, I think. So, Yeah, very interesting times, and it looks like South are in danger of dropping out of the finals race completely.
In great danger, I would have said. Yeah.
It's a big risk for Burgess as well, though, taking this job. I mean, people are looking at it from Warrington's point of view, but of course, Burgess has lived in Australia for a long time now, apart from the playing for England Rugby Union. That didn't last long. It's a big risk for him because, if he goes the same way as Daryl Powell, because it's not just a reflection on the coach's ability, it's a reflection on the club and where they are and what sort of club they are. And if he just doesn't find anything at Warrington to his liking and that it just doesn't work out, there's a real clash there, then it sets his own coaching career back.
I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? I don't think Warrington have won the championship for something like 60, is it?
It's 1955.
1955, yeah. I mean, for a club of their size,
it's incredible.
That's an incredible statistic, isn't it?
And the thing about the Sam Burgess appointment is you can draw some contrasting similarity, or some similarities, I should say, rather than with Benji at the West Tigers at the moment. That's other news. We've seen Tim Sheen stand down from his head coaching role with the Tigers. He was meant to be in that position until the end of 2024 or 2025,
yes,
I believe.
2024, yeah.
And that was a mentor sort of to teach Benji Marshall the ropes to take over following his departure. But that's come a year early. I just wonder whether they're throwing Benji Marshall in the deep end.
I think Benji's probably ready for the job. But, he obviously... He's had that year under Tim, and I think Benji's a very single-minded sort of a guy who will dedicate himself to success, as he did as a player, of course.
But your great players rarely make it, though, and
that's
players who were like Benji, I think, I don't know, maybe.
Well, it remains to be seen.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
Exactly.
And I think that there's a deeper issue at the Tigers with their board, and there's been a lot of controversy over the years about a few board members needing to stand down and refusing to stand down. Obviously, they're a merger club as well, so there's people that have come from that Western Suburbs background and Balmain Tigers background, so it seems like there's a little bit of friction there.
It's incredible that can still be happening, though. I mean, they won the competition as West Tigers in 2005. It's amazing. I mean, I'm not disputing that is happening, but it's amazing if it is. But they have the separate clubs, don't they, at various...
Yeah, even in like the New
levels,
South Wales Cup, we still have the Western Suburbs competing. So, I mean, we can't see what's going on behind closed doors. We can only, make our observations from the outside looking in.
But they do seem to have a fairly good stable of young players at West Tigers now. But again, they're signing Aidan Caesar, aren't they, from Leeds? And I think Aidan's 32 now, so he's no spring chicken. Obviously, fairly short-term signing. But maybe his experience will be good for the side, particularly when they're losing Luke Brooks to Manly. Yeah. So, who knows?
Exactly right. Now, Martyn, just before you walked in the door today, there's been a little bit of news that's broken around the TV rights going forward and the new TV deal. Can you give us any information at the moment on that?
Well, it's not been at this moment. I think the news is about to be formally released at any moment as we're speaking. But it looks as though the deal is a 3-year deal for about £23 million a year with Sky Sports. Now, the current deal is a 2-year deal for £24 million a year. So it looks as though it's £1 million a year less, and yet they've signed a 3-year deal. Now, I've not got any more details at this stage. We in particular, we don't know whether Channel 4 are going to continue broadcasting matches, or they've been doing 10 matches during the current Sky deal, and I hope they carry on. But I mean that's a remarkably disappointing deal to come up with, particularly when the previous deal, the deal that's completed this year. Was so far down on what was paid in the previous 5 years. If you remember, that was £40 million a year. So it went from £40 million a year to £24 million a year, and now it's gone down to £23 million a year. That's a terrible situation, and the problem is that the people who run our sport have, it seems to me at least, made absolutely no effort to devise a strategy to boost the broadcasting deal, in that time. Nigel Wood, when he was the chief executive of the RFL, he negotiated that £40 million a year deal, and he had a very strong relationship with Barney Francis, who was at the time the MD of Sky Sports. Barney Francis has since moved on, as has Nigel Wood, of course. But the new people, even when they're assisted by IMG, don't seem to have delivered the goods, as far as I can see. And I'm not sure whether this deal was negotiated by IMG or whether it's been negotiated by Rugby League Commercial under the leadership of Rodri Jones. But whoever's done it, they've tried to sugar the pill a bit by saying the original offer was £17 million a year, and they've managed to negotiate it upwards to £23 million. But even so, that's not a great outcome, I don't think.
28 years ago, it was 87 million, although that was for 5 years.
For 5 years,
you
yes.
Look at that was a huge amount of money, wasn't it?
In those days,
and that was 28 years ago.
And to be blunt about it, Richard, we've wasted it, really.
Yeah.
We've not. The point is that if you're going to grow a business or grow an organisation or grow a sport, you have to use some of the income you earn to invest in, shoring it up in future, ensuring the future of the game.
It's almost as though they should have had something like Framing the Future prepared, or
yes.
or they shouldn't have put it in the bin.
Yeah, absolutely. But you've got to you've got to invest in marketing. You've got to be smart. You've got to you've got to use, for example, in the modern era, social media to garner more interest in the game. But I don't know. I might be just a bit blind, but I don't see anybody from the RFL or Super League doing anything that will expand the base of support for the game. Maybe, do you see anything, Jake?
There's nothing like Bullmania, is there?
No.
But Bradford did put so much money into that. It wasn't just a cheap thing. I seem to remember they got their first instalment of money and they put about 150 grand straight into marketing the club.
They did.
It was a big thing to
and
do.
It worked. It worked. That's the point.
Yeah.
You spend that money on marketing and it works. As one of our readers wrote a letter to League Express last week and said, the solution is to clone Derek Beaumont and put him at every club, and that might be the solution. Who knows?
But a year ago, who would have thought that? Or 2 years ago, or 3? He's got it right now.
Yes.
But,
yes. Yeah. Well, he said he actually, texted me and thanked me for what I wrote about him in the immediate aftermath of the Challenge Cup, and he was particularly pleased by the fact that I wrote, Lee are not an overnight success unless you think that 10 years of hard work can be encapsulated in 24 hours. And that's true. And people forget he first came on the scene in 2013. So it's actually been quite a long journey for him. He's not a new boy on the block, so to speak.
We need characters like that, but when they come along, we tend to not approve of them.
Yes.
The game as a whole has a habit of not liking people like
it's
Derek.
very conservative, isn't it?
But also players with big personalities down the years have generally not been approved of, and it's just this weird thing that we're crying out for personalities, and then we don't tend to treat them particularly well when they come along. But if we want to talk about the game's ills, there's obviously money, what you say, but we have a governing body that have got the vast majority wrong of their big decisions, going all the way back to Maurice Lindsay, and we're sort of paying the price now for mistakes that he made and that Lewis and Wood and made as well down the years. We need to rip up our structure every 3 years and start again because the previous ones all failed. So it is partly money, but it's also partly just incompetence at the highest level.
Looking for the magic bullet, Richard, all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's this might sound a little bit downbeat, but if you just consider that rugby league is a small regional sport with not enough money, not enough fans, not enough players, and try and work around that, or try and at least improve those things. But you whether you have promotion and relegation, or whether you have licensing, or whether you have Super 8s, or whether you have whatever it is they want to introduce, those core things don't change.
No,
and so I'm not sure whatever structure will work.
The thing that's disappointing for me about the game at the moment, and about this potential new deal that we've been talking about, is that the World Cup last year was supposed to be a generational event, wasn't it? It was supposed to get far more people interested in rugby league, and it didn't, quite frankly, I don't think.
Well, a lot of people engage with. I mean, the women in wheelchair. I think a lot of people engaged with those things for the first time, and those World Cups were very, very good. But I mean, I partly think it's maybe been a victim of its own success that staging that is now so expensive that unless you get that 25 million quid from the government, no one can really pull it off. And that's why we've had to go back to just hosting a bilateral Ashes series instead. The obvious reason being that it's far cheaper to just fly one team over than a dozen or more, when you consider the different formats.
Yeah,
I thought the World Cup was fantastic, but we don't know how many new people came along. But it's never. We've taken events to places as one-offs. I think it's unrealistic to think that those people, for example, who went to Newcastle to watch England thrash Samoa, will then just become rugby league fans and will go and watch Newcastle Thunder. That's not realistic.
Well,
to me.
They clearly haven't done.
It doesn't work like that, though, does it?
No.
It just doesn't. So I have some sympathy for the game in that respect. But yeah, it's a real shame what's happened with the World Cup.
And Martyn, I noticed in your article this week you did touch on the Women's World Cup and the success it's seeing in Australia at the moment.
FIFA Women's World Cup, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And what we can learn as a sport from that success. What are some of the things you touched on in your article?
Well, the first thing is you've got to have competitive games, and soccer's really good at that, isn't it? Because power isn't a part of playing association football. You very rarely get deeply one-sided games. So that in the Women's World Cup, I think there maybe were one or two one-sided scorelines. I think there was 1-5-0 and maybe even 1-7-0. I can't quite remember who was on the receiving end of those games. But the vast majority of games were very tightly contested. So that's the first thing. People will turn up to watch a game, a sport that they think is going to be really competitive. And the thing that follows on from that is that you can then market those games very well because you can deliver what people are looking to see. We, for example, in our World Cup last year, we had matches being played at Super League grounds like St Helens, for example. I think Australia played. Who was it at St Helens? Was it Scotland or who was in their group? I can't quite remember. No, Italy, I think. I think they played Italy at St Helens. Now, for a normal St Helens game in the Super League, you can get a seat for 25 or 30 quid. They were asking 80 quid for us to go and sit in a seat to watch Australia v Italy. Now, the fact is, all your potential market knew that was not going to be a contest, really. So it's very difficult to sell those games like that for a premium price.
I think the RFL would respond to that, or the international body would respond to that by saying that if the All Blacks were in town playing anyone, they could charge what they want, and we all know the All Blacks would win. But the
All Blacks would fill St Helens against a minnow.
Yeah, but the Kangaroo brand has never been built up.
The Kangaroo brand isn't strong enough
because they don't play enough games.
No.
And to be honest, they actually don't win as many games as you'd think. They've been runner-up to New Zealand in approximately, off the top of my head, 4 major competitions since 2004. Unfortunately, never to us.
No.
But they have this thing that they're so much better than everyone else, and they sort of don't want to play. But just touching again on the Women's World Cup shows that's where in my opinion, the growth potential is for rugby league, the women's game, but I don't think it's going to be maximised. I don't think the RFL have got the skill.
But again, what's interesting about the Women's World Cup, Richard, is that again, the Australians completely dominated it, didn't they?
Well, no,
they probably will do it in future.
The group game against New Zealand, they were pushed close. In every World Cup,
they weren't in the final, though.
But in every World Cup, Australia has one bad performance in them, I think, men and women. This is just a theory I have. And in 2008, they saved that bad performance for the final against a team that was good enough to take advantage. Yes. In 2017, they saved it for the final, but we weren't quite good enough to take advantage.
No.
They can be beaten in World Cups. But yeah, you're right about that.
I mean, the women... What's interesting about Australian Women's Rugby League is the NRLW has now got 10 teams, and the standard is outstanding in my view. I don't know whether you've watched.
Yeah, it is.
Much of it.
The 3 English girls are over there doing
pretty well. They're playing their part.
So I think it's very similar to the men's game, where our best players can go over and do well, get starts.
Maybe we need more of our players doing that, actually.
Well, there seems to be a never-ending... One thing that's good about the women's game is that when Leeds and Saints both needed a batch of new players this season, they basically just turned to their under-19s, and both teams got to Wembley. And you wouldn't get that in the men's game.
No.
So the women, on that basis, might close the gap a bit quicker than the men's.
Let's hope so.
Because you're not just bringing in 3 or 4 Aussies to fill your gaps. You're bringing in 19 and 20-year-olds. But the women should have had a great chance in the last World Cup. No injuries whatsoever, which is absolutely incredible. But you had a coach who just wanted to pick the smallest pack of forwards available. And,
it was very sad because that semi-final at York, for me, that was the highlight of the whole World Cup last year, that women's game against New Zealand, England v New Zealand. And England couldn't quite do it.
Well, with the pack of forwards picked, it was. I mean, they're all very good forwards, but you have to pick some size, and it's that was just so bizarre what he did.
The Kiwis did, and we didn't.
Picking second rows at prop, and but there you are.
Yeah, and I hope that with some of the investment that's been seen, down in Australia and New Zealand in the women's game, hopefully that can inspire our governing bodies here to show that same investment.
But like I say about where the growth potential is, it can go from a very low level to a very high level very quickly. But I mean, playing at Wembley, the cup final, I mean, that's fantastic. But 8,000 were there, you've got to be a bit disappointed by that. And it's still hovering around the high hundreds for the big league games. I still don't think it's being marketed at all, really, by the RFL.
Well, they've all got to do a better job, haven't they?
The players are all happy, though. The players all seem delighted with the chance to play at Wembley using the great facilities. But I just think when you look at how women's sport is massive in other sports, and then you compare it to we haven't just moved ahead. It hasn't moved on as much as it has in other sports. You couldn't imagine us filling the big stadiums that other sports can now do for big games and internationals.
And unfortunately, I think in Australia, in the men's game at the moment, the sad reality is there's a lot of young players out there that they almost prioritise pulling on a maroon or a blue jersey over pulling on the Australian jersey, which baffles me because that's the highest honour for an Australian coming through playing rugby league. And I think that Mel Meningas came and he's tried to change that sort of culture over the past few years. So hopefully going forward with more investment in the international game, with more fixtures each and every year, we'll see that.
That's right. We might want to talk about the new tournament that's going to happen in the Southern Hemisphere this year with Australia, New Zealand and Samoa playing in a 3-sided tournament, and then PNG, Samoa, not PNG, Fiji and Cook Islands in a separate tournament. At least the Australians are going to be there again, aren't they? That's a positive thing, I think, and thank goodness the CBA dispute now seems to have been resolved.
One of the great things down under is that Samoa and Tonga have become very competitive on the basis that anyone who qualifies has been persuaded to play for them. And I remember in 2007 sitting down with Nigel Vangana and he told me what he wanted to do, and I didn't believe that it was going to happen. I didn't believe that great first graders who qualified for both New Zealand and Samoa would choose Samoa, and it's happened. And then the Tongans followed suit.
Without obviously weakening New Zealand or Australia.
Yeah, he would have done a bit, but exactly. But over here, we did the opposite. By scrapping Great Britain, it just meant that anyone who qualified for Ireland, Scotland and Wales, who was also good enough to play for England, was always going to play for England.
Yeah.
And that time 23 years ago, when we had the likes of O'Connor, McDermott, Joint, Martin, Connolly, Lowe's, etc., all playing for Ireland, Wales and Scotland also had really good players playing for them because they knew that a year later they could play in an Ashes series for Great Britain. That's gone. And we killed that ourselves.
Absolutely.
And Ireland, Scotland and Wales have always been championship standard players.
And the really weird thing is that the next Ashes series will still be England, won't it?
Yeah.
It won't be Great Britain. What's the logic of that?
Well, people will say, but it's the same teams. But my argument is if you go back to the 2001 Ashes under the old system, you had several Ireland internationals like McDermott, O'Connor, Joint, Connolly playing for Great Britain. You have to, like, for example, Craig Hall could have played 40-odd times for Wales, yet he never did because he was just waiting for that one England cap that never came. Because under the current system, playing for England is too attractive and playing for the other Wales, Scotland, Ireland just isn't attractive enough.
No.
And that's what happened when they scrapped Great Britain, and it was such a mistake. And
it was. And it was Richard Lewis's doing, actually, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it's funny, in the NRL at the moment, or back home, there's a lot of controversy around the eligibility rules. Obviously, we've seen with Samoa that you've got players like Brian To'o, Jerome Luai, Stephen Crichton, all playing for Samoa, but also representing the Blues at the same time. And it's because the tier system. So if you're a tier 1 team, you can't do that. But if you're a tier 2, you can. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Tonga and Samoa going forward. Because
I think they'll resist being moved up to tier 1.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Well, they can't ruin that. If they make these players choose between State of Origin and Tonga Samoa, that's going to be such a shame.
Yeah,
it will.
That's right.
The Aussies have had too much of a stranglehold over this. You know, it's.
Yeah, exactly right. No, that's fine, mate. I definitely see it. Like seeing more competition in the international game, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess we'll move on to some other news. Ian Watson, he's called for an investigation into the 6 again rule a bit recently. I know for me, I find that, a 6 again rule isn't that much of a reward once you've been held down an attack. I'd much prefer take a kick for the touch and advance my way up the field. I guess, what are your thoughts on this, Martyn? And should there be an investigation into the 6 again rule?
Well, it never does any harm to keep reviewing things, does it? And I think he's particularly annoyed by what happens on the first tackle. The first tackle, a team can hold down an opponent, and until a few years ago, they would have given away a penalty by doing that. Now they just give away a 6 again. But when it's on the first tackle, that's not much of a deterrent, is it? So, I think his suggestion, if I understand it properly, is that it should revert to being a penalty on the first tackle. And I agree with him on that. I think that's a very sensible idea.
It all goes back to the fact that new rules come in all the time, on average,
without
4 or 5 a year,
through.
without really a lot of them being thought through. And a lot get scrapped, a lot get modified. And the bigger picture is that the game looks completely different every 5 years to what it did look like. And that's why you lose fans.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, it's one reason, yes. Yes, it's a complex thing, isn't it? Why does rugby league lose fans in a way that...
How long have you got? Should we book a hotel and we'll talk about this for the next 24 hours?
Yeah.
I mean, look, as far as I'm concerned, if I reckon there have been 100 rule changes since the mid-90s, because it's roughly 4 or 5 or sometimes more a year. If I could press a button and go back to how the game was then, I would unhesitatingly do it. Because, the 40-20's been good. The corner flag being removed from part of play, that's been good. It's hard to think of many others that have really been that good. And I think the game ultimately has suffered from too many rule changes. And fans suffer because if you're a casual fan and you go to maybe 1 or 2 games a year, like a big derby, then you don't know the rules.
No.
So when you talk about 6 again, I bet there are people who've got no idea what that is. And the hooter goes, what's that?
Yeah.
Particularly when you're at the ground, it's not explained to you, is it, in any sense? So I agree with
that. But we always used to love the fact that our code of rugby was the simple one and rugby union was the complex one. And if we change again this year, November, December, we'll get an email saying there's been another 4 rule changes. Well, if it doesn't happen, it's the first one. It's the first time since Greg McCallum came over here in the mid-90s.
Yeah, and we've had a few fans in uproar over the past few weeks. There's been a big crackdown on pressuring the passer, pressuring the kicker, and contact after they've gotten rid of the ball. The refs seem to be cracking down really hard on this at the moment.
We saw that in the cup final, didn't we? With Elliot Minchella being yellow carded for a late hit on Lachlan. Or was it Lachlan Nam or was it Ben Reynolds?
Ben Reynolds.
Ben Reynolds, Ben Reynolds. I mean, I think it's very important to protect kickers, and I do think any late challenge on them should be penalised at the very least. Whether it should always be a yellow card or not, I'm more dubious about. It's interesting that in that case, Minchella didn't get or did he get a suspension? Or was it He got a 1 game, didn't he, I think?
I believe so.
Yeah. Well, a suspension implies it should have been a red card, just logically.
Yes, it does.
The other thing, I mean, they bring these crackdowns in mid-season, and then something like that happens in a cup final. Just random crackdowns will come along, and then a lot of them, again, just get forgotten about a few weeks later. They often come in at the start of the season.
If you're a coach or a player, you need to know the rules at the start of the season, and you need to know they're not going to change.
One of my favourite rugby league stories is when the 10-metre rule came in. It was 2 months into the season, and all the coaches just got a phone call one Monday morning saying, this weekend you're going to play 10 metres rather than 5. And that's the biggest rule change since the introduction of limited tackles.
That was a Maurice Lindsay special.
Which also came in mid-season.
You think about how much more speed you can get up over that 5 metre period.
But isn't it incredible how much it changed the game?
It opens it right up, I guess we'll see. And I agree with you, Martin. I think the penalty is sufficient enough, but some of these 10 in the bin, sin bins we've been seeing has been quite ridiculous.
I think there's a lack of understanding from certain people maybe who come up with these rules of how big a punishment a sin binning is. I remember a Challenge Cup semi-final in 2007 when Stacey Jones got sin binned for delaying a tap restart, and it nearly cost Catalan Dragons the game because Wigan in that 10 minutes scored 2 or 3 tries, and it was incredible that could have been. People listening to this will say, well, he shouldn't have done it, but the punishment's got to fit the crime.
Yeah.
And a sin bin, you can score realistically.
You see,
2 or 3 tries.
You could potentially, if you think about it seriously, you could potentially have a much more graded system of punishments. For example, you could yellow card a player, and that player, like Minchella in the cup final, could leave the field for 10 minutes. But you could potentially bring another player on in place of him, so that it's the player who's committed the offence who suffers, but not the team as a whole. And similarly with a red card, there's no particular reason why if a player gets sent off, it should always mean that from that point the team has to play with 12 men. You know, the punishment could just be that player's out of the game, but the team could still play with 13 men on the pitch, but it's just that player who's been sent off plays no further part in it.
I've floated that idea once and got very little support there.
I'm sure you did, yeah, well...
No, I agree. I agree, but now we are seeing more instances of teams winning despite having a red card. But there was a period where it was virtually impossible. Unless you were the best team playing the worst team, then you could never get away with it.
I'd like to see a real change where a player is sin binned until that team scores a try. So you could be off for 5 minutes, and the opposite team could have that 13-on-12 advantage. As soon as someone crosses the line and scores, then that player can come back on, or another player can come back on. One of my worst rugby league memories is Warrington going down to Leeds in the Challenge Cup quarter-final 95, and after half an hour we'd held them and there was only a couple of points in it, and then Ellery Hanley got sin-binned and we celebrated that like it was a try, because Workington had Ellery Hanley off the field and a man advantage 10 minutes before half-time, and in the time he was off, Leeds scored 3 tries. So it's not always an advantage for some reason. You've got to. I think coaches will practice how to play with 12 men, because you can tell teams who have been well drilled in it, and teams who maybe sometimes just don't quite know what to do, whether they've got 12 or the opposition have got 12. You can sometimes lose your head a little bit. That's the thing. I think these days when a team is attacking a line that has 12 men, the fullback defends in the line anyway, so there's no real difference. But one way you can get him is a little grubber in behind if the fullback's not there to cover. But I think it can be a huge game changer when one of your key players is sent off. Now this week there's been a few reports circling that Lachlan Miller, the young former Rugby Sevens Australian player who signed, he went with the Sharks originally, then moved to Newcastle at the start of this year, and they had an experiment where they put Kalen Ponga to 5'8", which didn't go too well. Now has seen Kalen Ponga return to fullback and seen the Knights return to form as well.
Yeah, he's a very fast player, and I think a very good one. So I think that could be quite a good signing for Leeds. Yeah,
that's right. So it looks like he's almost lost his spot in that Knights side, and he was one of the best players in the comp at the start of the year. So if Leeds could pick him up, I think next year that would be a tremendous signing.
Playing a full back,
But I think that's pretty much most of the news from this week. Is there anything else that rings a bell that you might want to talk about, Martin?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of ground there. Thanks, Jake, and Richard, thanks for your contribution.
Yeah, absolutely.
And perhaps we can move on to a new discussion in a few moments about the Richard's book.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, we'll end this part here. Obviously, stay tuned for the next episode with Richard on his new book. It's one you're not going to want to miss, especially for the rugby historians out there and Wigan fans, of course. So thanks for listening. Don't forget you can listen to this or watch it on YouTube. You can also find this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Go and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you have a spare moment, Total RL. And we look forward to doing it.
Take out a subscription to League Express as well, of course.
Exactly right.
We ought to mention.
We have to mention that. That's right. Right. Well, thanks, gents. We'll see you in the next one.